Hello there, it's May 30th, 2019. It's Broadcasting Scotland at 7, and we've got a tale of the Nancy Glen for you tonight. There's been a Marine Accident Investigation Branch report about the tragedy that happened in January 2018 on the 18th of January. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening, just before, and the Nancy Glen unfortunately came to grief in the waters, and the boat capsized, and it was a terrible tragedy for two of the people on the boat, and then of course all their families. But today I've got someone who knows about this in the studio. Her name's Elaine White, and she's from the... Where are you from?
I'm from the Clyde Fishermen's Association and the Clyde Fishermen's Trust.
All right, so let's take all this in stages, because there's a lot of material here, and let's establish exactly what this trust does and what the association for the fishermen does. How long has it been going, the Fishermen's Association?
Clyde Fishermen's Association is the oldest association in Scotland for fishermen. It was established in 1934. And its predecessor, the Tarbert Fishermen's Association, was established, I think, in 1874.
And how come you come to be the captain of this ship?
I saw a job advert in the Herald, and my family have always had links to the maritime environment, and I felt that it would be something that I would enjoy doing and would be worthwhile committing to.
Right. And so some of your family had boats and were fishing people, or?
Way back, yes,
yeah.
But we've got a lot of maritime links through the Navy and through divers, etc. So.
All right.
Yeah.
So we should acknowledge the people who were in the disaster and got harmed. There was the captain of the boat was called Duncan MacDonald. He was 46, very experienced fisherman. He was there from 16, the age of 16. He was a fisherman, so 30 years before this happened. So when you do something so long, you really do know what you're up to. And obviously, it was a very successful boat and a very well kept boat as well. And then there was a gentleman from Poland who was, and I'm going to, if you watch me, I get lots of the names incorrectly pronounced. I hope I do this one right. But Przemek Krabczyk, I think was his name, and he was 38 years old. And both these two men passed away in this terrible disaster. Their cabin mate must feel terrible about this all too. His name was John Miller. He actually had to climb out of the boat and walk along the ship and dive off into the sea, and it was pretty cold that night too. I think the air temperature was about 2 degrees and the water was about 6 or something. It was very, very cold for someone to go into that. But he managed to swim back to the boat. He tried to get the lifeboat open, but he couldn't manage it. It did open a bit later on, but that was just by happenstance. So this was I don't know, can you imagine yourself being in such an awkwardness, Elaine?
No, and you're right. The McDougalls, Duncan McDougal, his family, John before him, they were very, very experienced fishermen, as were Shemmy's family as well in Poland. I cannot...
So what do you called him by a different name then?
Yeah, that's just the name that he's known by.
Or was it kind of his nickname? Was it?
Yeah.
Say it again so we can hear it.
Shemmy.
Shemmy. Oh, lovely.
But I think it would be impossible to imagine that night for everyone on board, and certainly for John, who's had to live with this. And going forward.
The seas were fairly calm, I think, and
yes.
but there was a bit of a snow about.
Yeah, it was a calm night, and they were only a mile from home.
Yeah, and the visibility pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And it seems from what I read, and it's only from what I've read because I've got no experience of this at all. Sailors or the fishermen go out in the evening about 10:30 and stay out for a kind of a 24-hour period and then come back. Is that kind of right?
It really depends on the size of the boat, what you're fishing, where you're fishing, those types of things. But yes, I think in that night they have been out.
And the size of the boat is actually critical in all of this, isn't it? Because this boat was one of the smaller boats. Do they Under 12 metres or...
A lot of the fleet in the Clyde will be kind of under 15 metres. The majority of the fleet in the Clyde is smaller inshore boats.
And then it goes because of the size of the boat, there are various regulations that happen once the boat gets over a certain size. So it's that 15 metres?
In this case, it would be 12, yeah. But in 50, they were just under 12. But I think for the majority of the boats, there's different rules for over 15 and under 15.
All right. So, and this boat was kind of jointly owned by several different members of the family. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't speculate. It's exactly who, but only from what I read. There were several people who had stakes in the boat.
Yeah, it was a family
All
boat.
right. But it was a very well kept boat.
Yes. Yeah.
And it had been, naval architects had been involved in it, and various different modifications had been made to it over a long period of time.
There had certainly been a big investment in the boat. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we'll come back to the boat and all the different things that happened to it. Let's go and explore a bit the kind of general background, because in the last few days we've had the European Union elections, and one of the big hot topics of the European Union and whether people want to come in and go out of it, one of those big pillars that stands right in the middle of it is the fishing and the farming. And there's a lot of information given out about what is and what isn't. First of all, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that over on the east coast, coming out Peterhead, Fraserburgh, those kind of places, fisher boats are going out for, generally speaking, whitefish, the cod and haddock and all those kind of things. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. There's a big whitefish fleet and a pelagic fleet.
Okay.
Which is mackerel and herring.
All right. I did go mackerel fishing once when I was a wee Wayne on board a boat, and I insisted that my mother took this fish back to the bed and breakfast where we were staying, and she was horrified that it would stink the place out. But they did cook it for the breakfast the next morning. The little haddock the mackerel that I caught on, but it wasn't really catching. You just had to drop the hook in the water, and in those days they just came up because there was millions of them. But the fishing isn't what it used to be, is it? When you listen to the old songs about the herring fishing and all that, and all the big boats and all that, it's changed quite a lot, isn't it? Even the white fishing up there, the catching the whitefish.
Yeah, there's changes. Of course, there's changes in fishing, and there's various reasons for that, from quota allocations to modifications of markets. There's a lot of reasons why it's changed, and of course, bigger boats and consolidation.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just explain the difference now between that kind of fishing, which is usually quite big boats, I believe, and they go right into the deep seas. Yeah. We come round to the west coast of Scotland now, and you're coming out of Loch Fyne, and this is quite a long loch that's very beautiful all the way through from my own personal experience. And you come out to this bit of sea between Tarbert on the west side, and on the east side the entrance to the Loch Fyne, which goes right up inland there. And what kind of fishing goes on there?
In our area, it's mostly nephrock fishing and scallop fishing. Not so much finfish fishing anymore, but again, it's historical reasons for that as well, and that linked up with quota access and the types of boats that we have, etc. Most of our stuff is shellfish, and most of it is exported to the EU.
All right. So that means that your fish has got to go from the west side of Scotland all the way trundling across. What does it do? Go on the train, or does it go in the aeroplane, or does it go? How do you get it to the market?
Lorries, etc.
Lorries.
Yes, yeah.
So the lorries will drive across. Well, they obviously have to, because Tarbert's the other side, isn't it? Do you get a boat across from? How does that work?
They just drive round about.
They just drive around the edge. Okay, right, fair enough. And so you go all the way down to Dover?
Yes, yeah, currently they do. Yeah.
Gosh, a long way. Refrigerated lorries and all that stuff.
Well, it depends on where your market is, but that's the majority.
If you're going out to Europe, you said most of the stuff goes to Europe.
Yeah. So that's where a lot of it goes.
Okay. So we've got these small fish in. Now, on the night of this terrible disaster, what kind of fish were they trying to catch?
Prawns. It would have been prawns, nephrocks. Yeah.
And where did the prawns? I mean, obviously, when you're in the water and I hope to show my ignorance here. So some fish must go down to the bottom, and some fish must swim halfway up, and some fish, I suppose, like the top. And I suppose some fish go up and down, which depends on what they feel like.
Yeah.
But where do you get the prawns from? The deep water, the high water? Where are they located?
Seabed. Yeah,
on the
around
seabed.
about that area. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so, if you've got to catch those down there, what do you actually do? Do you have to trawl or something? What do you?
Yes, with rubber hoppers, that will keep a net in place, and that's how that happens. Yeah.
All right. And so, does that net then kind of dredge through the silt and the sand or whatever is at the bottom of the water?
No. You do have dredges, and they're usually used to catch scallops. But the prawn trawl's separate. It's a different setup from that. It has rubber hoppers, so it kind of skims, and that's how that operates.
Does it kind of bounce along or something?
Yeah. That's
All right.
Yeah.
What happens when stones get in the way or rocks get in the way?
Well, you just hope it doesn't, but yeah. So yeah.
It's just a question of hoping.
Yeah, it tends to be in the muddy ground. That you
so there's no sort of video camera attached to this, so you can't see what you're doing.
Well, some do, but I mean, if you're fishing for nethrops, you're fishing in mud usually.
Mud?
Mud, yeah. Scallops are usually in the gravelly ground or the hard ground. So that's why you need a different type of equipment.
Yeah, and so when the fishermen go about, and there must be more than just one fishing boat there, obviously, and they take all these prawns. I mean, how long does it take the prawns to, have babies? And I mean, they have billions of babies at a time, don't they? Because sometimes if you take a prawn and you bracket, there's all the eggs there. So I mean, some of those must have eaten by other animals, I suppose. And I mean, how does this sort of the cycle of life get sustained, and is it regulated? I mean, are the fishermen on the west coast only allowed to take so many of the prawns a year, or what?
Yes,
how does that work?
Of course. Yeah, we get advice annually from the European Commission. It comes from ICES, who do science, to see what kind of levels we're at in terms of MSY, etc., which is the maximum sustainable yield. So yes, there's a lot of science goes into what we can do and what we can't do, and we abide by that. We always do that. So.
And do the fishermen get a chance to talk about that to the European Commission, or what? How does that work?
We have a chance to talk about science to our government, and our government represents us in European circles and negotiates what happens with tax and quotas, etc. So yes, but we are able to discuss what we feel is going on with science, and the government will do regular science as well.
I see. All right, now let's just go back to these fishing quotas, because this is one of these big hot political topics, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And you hear lots of things, and I'll just tell you what I hear or what I've heard, and then you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, it seems to me that if you go up to that, where we were speaking before, the big boats up off Fraserburgh and that, these fishing quotas that are given by the EU, who actually owns them? How many people own them? Is it all the different boats, or is it a group of people who own these fishing rights?
Okay, the government, the national government, will own the rights to their own quota, effectively.
All right.
But
and how did the government distribute that?
Well, there was a system where they actually became. Well, there's various ways it's happened throughout the years, including track record of people fishing in a certain area.
What does that mean, track record?
If they had been fishing in an area for a certain species
so
over
if
a
you've
certain
been there
amount
a
of
long
time.
time.
But this happened historically, so that's not so much the case now. But what has happened over the last few decades, the quota, although worth nothing technically in a national asset belonging to the country, has accrued value. It's only technically worth what fishermen are willing to pay for it, but they have been willing to pay for it. And
so who do they pay? The government?
No, they've been paying each other.
No, each other.
They will be
so
selling.
The government
they will be selling
it.
Trading in quota. So this was backed up by some banks, and eventually it led to monetarisation of quota, and prices went up.
Can we just slow down so I can catch my head up with it?
Yes, yeah.
So you've got the government gets a quota from the EU.
Yeah.
And then they fish it out. They put it out to the various fishermen. Originally based on the precedent of fishermen being there. And then one fisherman said, "Here, can I buy a bit of yours?" And they say, "Well, yeah, okay, how much you give me for it?" And then it starts to become a market.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you've got a situation where the quota's actually been monetarised, and therefore bigger folk will be able to come in and say, right, I own I can buy this off you, so they get bigger and bigger lots of it. So how many of these sort of groups are there who own all this squish fishing quota now?
There's a lot of information about who owns most of the quota or who has most of the quota in their possession, and it's quite topical at the moment because there is a fisheries discussion paper out by the Scottish Government which is looking at issues like this and how they are going to allocate quota
but it's
in the
not
future.
It's not hundreds of people, is it?
No.
It's only a few, and that's all to do with the white fishing.
Well, there's a lot of people who have bought quota because they had to go to fish. They might not have an awful lot. So I know that you might be talking about several families, and there's been a lot of coverage about that, and that's true to a certain extent. There are people who had to buy quota just to be able to have access, but it is quite concentrated in ownership.
And then that quota issue comes next to that thing where they throw the fish back over the side, is that right?
No. Yes, if you don't have quota for a species, you can't land it, or you shouldn't be landing it originally. But now they have brought in another law, the discard ban, which means you should not be discarding it. So if you catch something that you do not have a quota for, you are supposed to land it now.
And then what do they do with it?
It usually goes to waste. It
Oh.
goes to a landfill.
Why does it get wasted?
That's something that we are obviously discussing at the moment, the ways forward for it. But
I mean, it cannot be because there's no market for it, because there are people in the world who starve.
Yeah. There's these decisions are not for ourselves to make. Of course, we work with government on them, but the discard ban has been brought in fairly recently, and is not so much of an issue for some of our men because they're catching more or less shellfish, and it's quite a clean fishery. So we don't have those issues with a lot of bycatch.
That's what I was trying to go to next. So what I was going to ask you next was that if you go over to the other side of the country and you go to the west thing, is it the same system? No.
Well, not necessarily. For instance, if our men are catching nephrops or prawns, it's a different type of fishing that they will be doing. And if they
So are the quotas involved in this?
No, there's very selective gear involved in this. And basically what that does mean is they don't catch very many fish.
All right.
So, but they still do have issues with choke, which is if there's too much species in the area, they will catch them if there's an awful lot. For instance, there are certainly some choke issues on the west coast. In different regions, different species. So you might find that spur dogs in the southwest of Scotland, most fishermen do not have the quota for that, and there's a lot of them. And so there's things like that are related to the discard ban, but it's about choke species, and we try and work with government to find reasonable solutions and do scientific trials.
And that little bit choke species, just explain that a little bit more so that I can really understand.
Is if you do not have a quota to land a species, or you're not allowed to catch it for maybe conservation reasons, etc. But if you find at any particular time there is a lot of them in one region, it can become difficult to fish, because if you put a net there, you're going to catch them.
Yeah. I mean, to the ignorant, like I, you go, you look at the water at the sea. I mean, how do you know what's underneath it?
Very,
I mean, you chuck your net in, and surely, okay, we've just discussed whether fish swim at the bottom or the top or the middle or whatever. But I mean, you can't possibly know. I mean,
they do. They've got a great amount of
technology.
Well, yes, you get things like sonar and whatnot that can let you know where some fish stocks would be, or where they would, where you can avoid. If you, for instance, if you've seen a mark of herring and you weren't out to catch herring, you would avoid that. So there's technology that allows you to do these things, and also not every species will be found in every area. As I said, scallops tend to be found in hard ground, so you'll know that's where you get them. You're not going to find them in a different region. Fishermen have a very skilled job, and people think it's just a net in the water, and it's incredibly complex, incredibly technological. They have a lot of monitoring systems that they have to abide by, a lot of paperwork and regulation. So it's, in a sense, it's a very complicated business.
I see. It's absolutely fascinating that you all this stuff, because you don't know, do you?
No.
I mean, nobody knows really. No. And that's what's the beauty of Broadcasting Scotland, because it can bring all this information
the more people learn about it,
to
the
front.
better. Yeah, the more people learn about it, the better, because I think the public don't quite understand the complexities of it, or how hard the job is, or how skilled the job is.
And that's the same with all of our lives now, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Because we're also specialists in what we actually do. I mean, like your job, I mean, it wouldn't be easy to replace you, would it? All the stuff you've got in your head. And me, I mean, there's dozens of me knocking around all over the place. But for the specialist knowledge you have, that's quite.
I've had some great teachers. So,
yeah. All right. So now let's think about a little bit more about the depth and detail of this. We've got a good picture now, I think, of how these quotas work and the differences between the East and the West. I mean, we've touched on the European Union and talked about the quotas. I mean, give me a little bit of the issues around the Brexit, as far as the people who are doing the shellfish on the West Coast. Can you fill in a bit of detail about the worries they may have of a no-deal Brexit? I mean, do the fishermen want to come out of the European Union generally? And what are the reasons for all of that?
Yeah, that's a complex question. One thing that our association has always said is that we are politically and constitutionally neutral, because we have to be. Because we probably have members who feel all different sorts of ways about Brexit, about independence, about various other political issues. When people ask me how a fisherman votes, I feel it's very much like asking someone, how does a blonde person vote? There is no way to give you a straight answer to that. But I do think what we have concentrated on is making sure that we make the best of any situations that we find ourselves in. And we are very aware that we are reliant on the EU market. And it would be very hard to replicate something that would subsidise the business that we have at the moment with the EU. So we are very aware of the dangers in going forward, and we try our best to roadmap a sensible solution. But in terms of the fishery that we do follow at the moment, we can see concerns. However, we do feel that one thing that's been positive is that we're now having a discussion about things like quota, about who owns it, about how it can be distributed, which may not have happened elsewise. But, who knows what the future will be. We will always try our hardest to work for our fishermen in any constitutional or political situation.
Uh-huh. It's just the practical issues, I suppose, are pretty stark, aren't they?
Yeah, the practical issues are stark. And I think as well, we have always been conscious that we don't follow any kind of campaign narratives, because everybody's individual situation is different. But we are very aware that our markets are reliant on Europe.
You've got such a distance between your fishing ground and then getting to the boat in Dover, and if there was any hold up on that line, it would be quite difficult for you.
It would be very difficult. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's not to say that things aren't quite fair at the moment. I mean, for instance, I told you that our men mostly fish for shellfish. A lot of them don't go to fin fish, and that's because the quota is held more or less in certain regions in Scotland by and large. And that's a domestic issue more than it's an EU issue. We do have a lot of EU boats fishing round about the Scottish coast. I have had texts at 3:15 in the morning from my members to say that there's Spanish articulated lorries, 21 of them leaving full of monkfish, and they can't catch one box. So I think there's a recognition that there had to be some kind of straightening out or fair access, and I think everyone would agree with that, but I don't think our narrative was quite as strong. That all of our issues were just to do with the EU. There's a lot of issues.
Yeah.
We need to sort
So boats from this area, the West Coast, can go to other fishing grounds, can they, in other parts of the EU?
Well,
can they go down to Spain or not?
They probably wouldn't want to.
Too far to go, too much money to get there.
Yeah, they would. And also,
but then why would the fishing boats from Spain come up?
Because we have very rich fishing grounds. And we have the stocks that are desirable for those areas. So,
and if the guys who are collecting fishing shellfish haven't got the quota for those monkfish, why are they worried about it?
Well, they're not worried about it. They would like to have probably the flexibility to go to different types of stocks.
Oh, I see.
In time. At the moment, it's not like that. But in time, I think they would like to see those opportunities, and some of those issues are domestic and some of them are related to access to the EU. There might be some more quota coming in, but it's not all to do with the EU, and I think there's a recognition that the markets just as important as potentially access is. It's really about compromise.
And of course, there are 28 member states of the European Union still,
Yeah.
and of course everybody has to brush along with each other, but just behind the back of your hand and a whisper in my ear. Are there any sort of tussles between these, fishermen? Do they get cross with one another, even if it's only down the pub, or?
Between the different nations?
Yeah.
I think there has been experience of that, but I do think as well there's about 14 nations out of the 28 that do not have a seaboard, but also probably do work with colleagues regarding fisheries negotiations and whatnot. So yeah, it's very complex.
Yeah. Because there was that thing, wasn't there? It came just at a time when the EU had been rejected by the votes from the southern border from Scotland, and suddenly there was a scallops war, wasn't there? And it struck me at the time, though it's just a bit of a smile in it really, that the European Union was set up to stop wars, and as soon as we decided to come out of it, all of a sudden the fishermen are at loggerheads over the scallops in the French fishing grounds down in the south there.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have any members who were down at that time.
No.
So,
but there were some Scottish boats involved in that,
yeah,
weren't
there were some Scottish boats, mostly the larger ones from probably the North East Salmon Scalloper ones. But we didn't have any members down there at that time. I believe it was something to do with the gentleman's agreement. Okay. So they rolled over. But I believe that they managed to negotiate out of it.
So it seems to me that we've painted a lovely background for our canvas of this beautiful picture of the fishing. I think we better start focusing in on this report that's come out today, and as best we can, maybe describe the awkward accident that happened and maybe the things that were in this. I've had this all printed up here about the analysis and the outcomes and the recommendations. Do you think that's where we should go now, or did you have anything else you'd like to fill in before we?
No, I mean, I think that's fine, and I think the only thing that we can really say about the MEIB report is to thank the MEIB for their work. At the moment, I think the families are still digesting the results of the report. From our perspective, the thing that we would say as an organisation is that we support any recommendations that will improve the safety for any woman or man going to sea. So we can only commend any ideas to make that better. And also, we also support Fergus Ewan's recent decision 2 weeks ago to start a safety group involving active fishermen to look at this type of issue and other types of safety issues. It is one of the most dangerous peacetime occupations.
Yeah, and it's from what I read, the 3 fishermen involved in the accident actually all had proper training on this, and they've got qualifications for the safety businesses around their vessel. Is that right?
They're all very experienced seamen, yes, yeah. and come from a family of fishing families, yeah.
So they were well versed with what's going on. But this boat itself, it was built in 1991.
I believe I saw that, but yes, yeah,
1992,
yeah, it was around about that time, yes.
And then it was modified a bit in 2002 with a naval architect, and that was all done. And then various different cranes and stuff were changed over the period, and the way that the fishing trawling nets were attached to the boat and the things were changed. And there was slight modifications when they put a heavier crane on. They altered the materials around it so that the weight. But all these different things, they have it seems to me from what I read in the report, they have a cumulative effect because there's no kind of exact baseline to work from, and so what you do here and there, but of course with the experience these people have and the various different people who are involved, they all seem to think it was fine.
It's a no blame report as it stands, and as I said, they've done a thorough analysis, and we do not know how the families feel it will be for them to speak about that.
That's not really the way they feel. I mean, I do understand about the feelings.
Yeah, but I think we don't have a feeling of how they've only just received this report, and I don't think it would be appropriate for us to comment too deeply into that.
Okay.
But what I would say is if there's any positive outcomes in terms of how we go forward in terms of legislation and helping the safety of fishermen, that would be what we focus on.
But basically speaking, it says in here that they were manoeuvring the boat and it seems that one part of the net became embroiled in mud, and the other one was actually floating free, as from what I read. But as they turn, obviously this net has been caught in the mud, and obviously that's been a contributory factor of pulling the boat over. And then of course once she was going to starboard, I believe, and that's how do you describe that? It was port out and starboard home, wasn't it? That's where you get the word posh. So that means the port side must have been on the left if you're standing on the boat looking at the pointed end. Is that right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the boat has been tangled in this net, and obviously the pressure and all the different things that were happening, and it's gone over, and these poor two men were trapped inside the vessel, and it sank pretty quickly, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, it took some time actually, because there was an attempted rescue from some of the local boats, and certainly the local fish farm boat picked up with the survivor, John Miller. So a lot of the other local fishing boats went out to try and help.
And there was a diver who dived in. That must have been a brave thing to do.
There was a lot.
And he attached a rope to it and all that.
A lot of people who went above and beyond the call of duty, and I think that's why we feel that it's important that we acknowledge how much people.
And there were lifeboats from various different places. Were there 3 lifeboats, I think?
Yes, there was, and I mean it's.
And of course, it was in the dark, in the cold, in the night.
Yeah, that's right, and it was just quite a horrific scene for everyone who was involved, but the bravery and the hardiness of the people who tried to help in any way they can must be commended.
And of course, it's in these things where the local community, and of course in a fishing community, much like in the old mining communities, there's a great warmth between the people. I mean, I suppose they have their days where they don't like each other, but basically speaking, they know that they're all in the same. Well, I shouldn't say in the same boat, but that's how they feel, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a strong community spirit. There's a strong.
And so, what's been the response to that? Have they collected some money for the bereaved families or something?
It was immense. I mean, we helped to run a campaign. We were a very small trust, and we were amazed at how this national campaign developed. And it was actually not even just national, international. Initially, we started a campaign to get the boat up. We were raising funds for that, but the Scottish Government met that cost. Oh, so
the Scottish Government stepped in and they paid for that?
Yes.
Because that was about $1 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And the remainder of the funds will go towards helping the families and the children.
Right, so what kind of fund have they built up?
We've established a second trust called the Nancy Glenn Trust, and that's made up of trustees from the community as well, who are going to come in and make sure that we manage the money responsibly. It has been difficult while there was an investigation on, so we were able to meet a lot of costs for the families and pay hardship, but now we are finally able to settle. So the trust will be meeting shortly to finalise all of that.
So it's about £300,000, is it?
Yes, and I think they will seek to do something
sensible.
sensible.
But you couldn't give out the money because somewhere along the line there was a police investigation started, and then it was only a few days, 20 days, and they shut it down.
It was all very complicated, yes. We were advised while there was an investigation on it, not because of any assumption of any wrongdoing, there was an investigation.
I suppose just because 2 people had died, is that right?
Yes, of course, and we were advised that we had to keep it in trust and do the most sensible thing we could and provide hardship payments in the meantime, which is what we've done. And now we will be able to settle with the community members on board making the right decision. Because
it is an absolute tragedy for a family, isn't it? When
there's young children.
It's their only source of income. Yeah. And it's very, very difficult, especially if they've got a young family left behind.
Yeah, well, we're just aware of the children who are, they're not going to have their fathers growing up, and that's tragic. And if the trust can somewhat help, and the generosity of the community, the global community, will help support those families. So that's. And
the boat itself, now they pulled it out of the water. What's happened to the boat? Will it be able to be repaired? Will they be able to put it back in the water one day, or what will happen to it?
I do not know at this moment in time. I don't think it will be going back to sea, but at all. I think they know. Yeah,
it's another thing about sailors. We're told are very entertainers in the theatre. Were very suspicious people. People carry a rabbit's foot with them and things like that. Would there be something about that?
Well, there has been boats that have had tragic pasts, but I don't think that will be the case with the
not
Nancy
shunned because of suspicion. No,
I don't think so.
No.
That wasn't the family's wishes, anyways.
Anyway, yeah. So let's have a look at this then. I mean, I think it's the recommendations is really the way to go, isn't it? I don't know if I've got these here now. So every 5 years the boats are going to have to be checked. Is that about the right? Tell me what they... Have you got your head around the things that have been proposed?
Yes, there'll be more strict regulations in terms of stability, and it'll be more in line with what happens with over 15 boats, really, in terms of checks. And I think we've discussed this before, talking about the fleet and, inshore fleet. We do have a problem, I would say, with ageing boats. And I think if we can kind of... And there's various reasons for that. There's reasons because it's not the same financial investment that's going into other areas where the bigger boats are, etc. But I think anything that helps to improve the safety of these boats is very much welcomed. Of course it is.
Yeah, surely. And there was a point that we didn't really touch on, but there was a time when they actually changed the tanks in the boat, didn't they? So they could bring home... if you've got fresh fish, it's more valuable than the
live fish. Live langoustine would be more valuable than than frozen or fresh. But live is the most expensive.
And when you make one of these boats, it must be a huge investment. How much does it cost to build a boat? I mean,
that's it. Finger in the air.
It could be X, can it?
Finger in the air. Yes, it depends on the boat. But there's not a lot of boats. There's actually a boat being built in the Clyde, and it's the first boat that's been built in the Clyde in 16 years.
Gosh.
We don't have the facilities on the west coast the way we used to have. We used to have Campbelltown Shipyard. We don't have that anymore. But we are doing all that we can to try and bring that back. And we're hoping that the Fisheries Discussion Paper will be looking at issues in terms of infrastructure all around the inshore coast, east coast, west coast, wherever, to help them raise their capacity and make sure that we have got safe fleets out there.
Yeah, because that boat actually was made in Eyemouth, wasn't it? Which was on the east coast rather than the west coast. And but it must be. I mean, when you think about all the danger of doing the actual work and going out to sea, the hardship it requires to go through that, and then the huge investment in a vessel, which really I suppose you don't know if it's ever going to make the money back when it must be a group of people who gets there, mustn't it, to put it together?
Yeah.
And so it's a heck of a challenge, isn't it?
It's an increasingly concerning challenge for certain regions, I would say, in particularly inshore communities, because I feel that when we are losing the facility to build our own boats, and we don't have the access to things like loan guarantee schemes, which they do in places like Norway. Actually, the Western Isles ran a very successful loan guarantee boat building scheme, which is unfortunately no longer running. But that helped a lot of local community people to build their own boats, and it was risk-free almost. I think it was one default in as many years as it ran, and that allowed boats to be built locally. And I think that's something that we do need. If we have to get young people more interested in coming into fishing, we need to make sure that the fleets are of a reasonable age and reasonable standard, and they're safe for the men, because it's an increasingly pressured environment. We have renewable energy, we have cables, we have MPAs, we have no-take zones, and a lot of those things are in aquaculture as well. Aquaculture is developing massively in the west coast and tends to be in the sheltered areas, which is the areas where men would want to fish generally. So they are getting pushed out into different types of areas. So having a safe vessel is very, very important.
Yeah. And of course, for these small fishing communities, the boats actually provide income for the little village that grows up behind them, don't they? It's not just the fact that the men bring in the fish or the women bring in the fish and then sell those, but of course they need to be serviced, don't they? They need to be painted, and you need places for the people to stay and
Yeah.
food for them, and so it generates the post office and obviously the bank, because blah blah blah, because we all rely on one another, which is how we started this, isn't it, with the division of the labour, which we talk about frequently on this channel.
Yeah, I mean, very much so, and I see that. I'm concerned about that at the moment, particularly for inshore communities, all around the coast, and particularly our area. I feel that our fishing fleet is going down. We have an aging population and a high depopulation rate, and it would be great to see new blood coming in, but they have got these obstacles. And I think you're right in terms of, I like to call it the sticky money. These little boats, somebody might look at it and say, oh, it's just a little boat, there's only 3 people working on it, 4 people working on it. But then if there's another 20 people who are relying in some way from the income that comes from that boat is making a massive contribution, particularly in rural areas.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that little boat might be bringing more into the community than a big boat that's landing to somewhere in Norway.
I mean, you could put diesel in it, and I read the capacity of the tank, and I thought, I'm glad that's not my car.
Yes, yeah.
This is huge, isn't it?
Indeed, we've seen this in the recent past. We had the marine protected areas in the Clyde, which we were very supportive of, and I feel we should always say that. However, there was some lobby groups who'd lobbied for extra areas, which meant our men lost their shelter, and that's resulted in several boats from our fleet disappearing. And it's resulted in the fuel costs going down, and the chandlers and Tarbert closing, and it's been a massive domino effect. And I do think it's getting to a critical point now that if we want to be a nation that has a social conscience about fishing and moving towards something like a Norwegian model, which I would like to see, we definitely need to think about how we do it better.
And there used to be a bit of romance about it too, didn't there? I mean, I remember people in Lossiemouth, for example, mending the nets on the side of the thing, and the little chandler shops and all that stuff, and it was kind of a sort of romance about it in that time. But I mean, things come and things go, things change, and money takes over a lot of the time, as you've mentioned before, with this quota business. And does it all become money, or is it still a thing that fathers would like their sons to do? And
yeah, I think it's something that fathers would like their sons to do, but I think it's an incredible, and daughters indeed, but I think it's becoming an incredibly...
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I think it's becoming an incredibly challenging environment, and I think there's a lot of obstacles against the fishermen, whether it's... I mean, we traditionally would have worked with the Scottish Government just to make decisions on what's acceptable, sustainable fishing practices, etc. There's far more involvement of communities and wider communities, which is a good thing. We believe everyone should have a voice. But on a more controversial note, I believe there's a lot of money coming into Scotland from America, from London, which has an interest in managing the fisheries, either privately, maybe potentially eventually, or certainly shaping the policy in a way that I think most Indigenous fishing communities are concerned about.
Yeah. This is slightly off the piece, but I did hear a radio programme about them selling tuna in Japan.
Okay.
And one tuna can be £100,000 or $1 million.
Yeah.
I mean, and they have, they restaurateurs go to these things, and they have huge auctions about it.
Yeah.
Is there anything equivalent to prawns? Maybe this is the one most wonderful prawn ever, but no, there couldn't be, could there?
Well, we have bluefin tuna.
Yeah.
Of the west coast of Scotland,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't have the ability to catch it.
All right.
But we are doing studies, and some of our partners in the Western Isles are looking at studies at the moment to track that tuna, which goes all the way to the Azores and over to America and back again. So we know it's the same tuna that's doing a big circle, but we don't catch it. But we do look at examples like the Azores, where they have managed to develop a community fishery, a canning factory, a visitor attraction, and it's all from an artisanal line fishery of bluefish tuna. And we're thinking, well, we could do that. And that's the kind of discussions that we're trying to have about diversification with the Scottish Government. And to be fair, they're doing a very inclusive thing in developing this discussion paper.
Oh, jolly good. So is there anything else you'd like to tell us about this story? Because I think we must have told everybody everything. I mean, unless there's... I shouldn't say this, but I've got an earpiece, and my producer is very good, and she gives me little tidbits, but the volume's soft, and I haven't been able to hear all that she said. I could hear her sort of whispering, but it wasn't. So I hope I've covered most of the things she wanted me to cover, and I hope that we haven't left anything out. I think we've probably covered most of the ground. But is there anything else?
I think just from our perspective to say thank you to everyone who covered this. Thank you to the public for understanding and for caring and for showing such emotion. I hope that that's a long-standing relationship that the country can start to have with its coastal fishermen. Because when I go to places like Vigo or other countries like Norway, I see how the fishermen are held in great esteem, and I see how little boys and little girls want to be a skipper one day. And I would love to see our communities going that way. I get worried that we're close to losing them, but I hope that in some way they realise that it's our national guys. We should support them.
Sure. Well, that seems to me to be a reasonable place to end this discussion. I've just got to thank you very much for spending all that time, Elaine, with us. And I hope that you've managed to gain a good insight into this tremendous industry that we have in Scotland. And it's been so sad that two brave men lost their lives in this, and feel very sorry for their families.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much. I think that probably concludes our programme for this evening. We'll be back tomorrow with another show, and look forward to seeing you then. So bring your friends and subscribe if you can. Well, I thought that now I'm getting a little message about Full Scottish on Sunday. Anyway, we'll be back soon. We'll be back soon with other great shows on Broadcasting Scotland. And obviously, oh yes, I remember that one now. We're going to Galashiels, another day out. We're going to go to the All Under One Banner march at Galashiels on Saturday. Come with us, and if you can't come with us in physicalness, come with us on the broadcast. We'll have about that for you after it. Bye bye for now.